Hello and welcome to a new look podcaster's guide to the conspiracy, now with 200% more merchandising potential.
Yes, after a year of asking Josh to produce a brand new podcast icon, we finally gave in to Josh's legendary laziness.
So very, very lazy.
And spent the good monies of our fine patrons on new and exciting artwork.
Frankly, we're very pleased.
Indeed we are. One James Windleborn, aka Smug Liberal, is the designer of this new look for us, and it is swanktastic.
Please don't use that word again.
I will, and you cannot stop me, but I will bide my time.
Anyway, we recommend you look at James's material over at smugliberalminority.com.
There'll be a link in the podcast notes.
And if we can get past my legendary laziness, we'll be setting up some kind of online storefront where you can get mugs and t-shirts and phone cases with the new art on it.
And remember, if you don't buy a mug, Alex Jones wins.
And now, the same old theme song as last week. The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, brought to you today by Josh Addison and Dr. M. Dentith. Hello, you are listening to The Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy.
Or watching it on YouTube.
Well, let's hope, because if you are, then you'll see both myself, Josh Addison, Dr. M. Dentith. Well, actually, we won't look any different, but the picture that will show up at the front will look different because we've got new artwork.
We have, indeed, if you're listening to the podcast and you're using a podcast app, and if you're not using a podcast app, I am quite
sure
curious.
How you're doing it.
Yeah. You could actually listen to it on the Conspiracism page, but you'll still note there is new artwork associated as logos, artwork, banners, the whole galore with our podcast, because we have designed, well, we have commissioned, with feedback, we made suggestions, we've commissioned new artwork designed by James Windleborn, aka Smug Liberal on Twitter.
Yeah, so it wasn't not entirely my towering laziness. There was also the fact that I'm not a graphic designer and a little bit rubbish at coming up with good ideas for logos. So we thought, let's get the professionals.
Rubbish at coming up with good ideas.
Except it was my idea to hire a professional to do it for us.
Which cost us a large sum of money. Once again, a terrible idea by one Josh Addison.
But it was a large sum of money from our patrons.
Yes.
So basically, thank you.
And the reason why we commissioned the work, and we specifically, when we commissioned the work on Twitter by putting a call out, said we were going to be paying for the artwork, is that we do think that artists deserve to be paid.
Yes, none of this exposure nonsense.
Which then takes us to the emotional blackmail part of this preamble to the podcast, because if you enjoy the podcaster's guide to the conspiracy, Josh and I are artistes of a kind. So you might like to think of putting a few dollars our way to help keep this podcast growing, and also to allow us to do things such as commissioning artwork for the podcast, and who knows, in future, commissioning new stings or songs.
Indeed. Now, from one kind of shameless self-promotion to another, I hear you're in an encyclopedia? Or something like that?
I am. So the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is put out by the University of Martin, which is in Texas. Or is it the University of Texas, Martin? I can never quite get these American universities and their name, location, jimble jamble quite right. They've put out an entry on conspiracy theories, and I'm pleased to say that my work is referenced throughout.
Ooh la la.
Indeed, it's referenced throughout to the point where at the end, where it has a list of recommended readings, my 2014 book, The Philosophy of Conspiracy Theories, as published by Palgrave Macmillan, is recommended as one of the best texts to read to get up to date on the philosophy of conspiracy theories.
Well, there you go, academic recognition.
Let's hope it brings me a job.
That would be nice.
It really would be.
Jobs are good.
Is this a thing called money?
Yeah, they give you some of that stuff.
And disposable income. I've never actually experienced these things, but I would like to one day at least have a few weeks of it.
Yes. But until that day, we'll just keep recording episodes. I guess now I think that's it for the shameless self-promotion. So instead, let's talk about a time when you were on the radio recently.
Indeed. Just a everyday event in my life.
Yeah.
So, Josh, tell me about me being on the radio.
Well,
because I know nothing about this.
So I saw an interesting, I actually read the print version. Radio New Zealand's website, rnz.co.nz, I guess it's a .co, isn't it?
Actually, that's a good question. I just start typing
RNZ
RNZ
and it fills it in for me.
But yeah, I think it is actually registered as a company website as opposed to an org or, I mean, same as tvnz.co.nz.
Probably,
They are kind of companies.
It's hard to tell in this dystopian socialist nightmare that we live in, where the government controls all and gives us free healthcare and what have you. But no, Radio New Zealand has a website where, apart from being able to listen to their various shows and interviews and so on they put on, they also have written articles about this stuff. And I happened to be reading such an article about people who'd been digging for giants' bones somewhere down in New Zealand. And who did I see referenced and indeed quoted in this article but one Dr. M. Dentith? And I thought, I know a Dr. M. Dentith. They're probably going to want to find this other M. Dentith and fight for the right to use their name.
And I did, which is why I'll be going to court next week for murder.
So we thought, since it's a relevant topic, why don't we talk about people hunting for giants and also positing conspiracy theories as for why we can't find giants. So in that way it's relevant to actually...
So this is basically a rehash or recurrence, or to use a philosophical term, recusant, which is the first time the term conspiracy theory turns up in the Oxford English Dictionary, is associated with the recurrence, I can't even pronounce the word properly, of a conspiracy theory. So it's an apt term of the Celtic New Zealand thesis.
It is. It all sort of ties into that. So, I mean, a bit of background. People have been talking about giants forever. Pretty much every culture has stories about people larger than regular humans who used to exist but don't anymore for some reason. In the Bible, obviously, you've got your Goliaths, and the Nephilim are the ones who people like to talk about. What were they? They were like half angel or something, and they were supposedly all giants. And
yes, depending on which version of Christian eschatology you are looking at. Yes, either the offspring of angels and humans, or they are the race of pre-human entities that existed before the deluge, where they lived along with humans, and then God wiped them out with a big flood, or other variations of the same.
Yes, now we could give sort of, possibly more scientific explanations for these things. Occasionally human beings have various growth disorders that cause them to grow to fairly impressive heights. I think Robert Wadlow, the American man who has the record for being the tallest officially measured and verified human being, was almost 9 feet tall and supposedly still growing when he died.
Because it turns out that there are certain genetic disorders that basically don't turn off the growing process in human beings.
So it's entirely possible these sorts of things have been happening since as long as there were human beings. So that could certainly be an origin for some of these stories. But
and there are people who, as ethnicities, are on average taller than other ethnicities, which is usually due to dietary factors, access or lack of access to particular types of food.
But that's a bit too prosaic an explanation for some people. Often people will go out looking for giants specifically so that they can verify some theory about these ancient peoples that they had. So when it comes to the Bible, people will be looking for evidence of the remains of these giants that were in the Bible. I mean, Goliath, depending on how you interpret the Bible, was his height comes out at either 9 foot something or 7 foot something, which is entirely within the range of human possibility. So people have been people sort of go on hunts. The first one I saw, old Cotton Mather, who was a scientist who came up with lots of interesting stuff, but was also one of the key figures behind the Salem witch trials, for which he's mostly remembered.
He was one of those scientists.
Yes. He found some fossilized leg bones and teeth near New York in 1705. Reckon they must have been remains of the Nephilim, although people these days think they're probably mastodon bones.
Indeed, actually, this seems to be a recurrent feature for a lot of the giant mythology we find in particularly the 17th, 18th and 19th century, is the discovery of fossilized remains and people assuming that these must be relatively recent human bones of some particular kind, and it's only in retrospect when people go back to these original discoveries that they realize, Actually, we're probably looking at the bones of extinct animals, which is why humans at the time didn't recognize them as such and went, oh, this must be a really big version of X or Y, like a human being.
Yes. Now, moving it to a local context, there are stories, of course, in Maori and Polynesian culture of large people, as we said, pretty much universal. And so people here have been digging around to look for remains of these supposed giant folk. Perhaps we'll leave the motivations till a little bit later to really get into exactly why people might want to.
Josh
establish
doesn't want
the
to use the word
existence
racism.
Oh, I do. I just want to wait. I want to build up. I want to build up to it. And talk about just what's been happening at the moment. So the RNZ article from last week by Susan Strongman.
Indeed.
Is she a fan of Adventure Time? Because there's the character of Susan Strong in Adventure Time.
You know, I had not made that connection whatsoever.
there you go.
And if I had made that connection, I probably still wouldn't have asked her that when we were talking about giants hidden in caves down country.
Just wondering how often she gets that reference given to her. But yes, she came across this story independently of you. Is that correct? But it's something you've been looking into for a while.
So there is this blog called I've just gone completely. Tangata Whenua. Because I got stuck there on the sound. Speech to fluency is terrible, and one of the reasons why I particularly hate it is when trying to say people's names or pronouncing words that aren't in English, suddenly it sounds like I don't know what I'm talking about or I don't know who I'm talking to. And that makes me feel embarrassed, which of course then amps up the anxiety of speech disfluency. That then means you just can't say a single word properly and then you just shrivel up and die. But that's another matter entirely.
Yes.
So there's this blog called tangatatawhenua.com, and it was devoted to an investigation of apparently a cavern which would contain within it the remains of 7 to 8 foot tall pre-Maori people in the country of Aotearoa, New Zealand. Now, I came across this blog sometime back in 2017 and started following it, going, oh, this is a bit weird. I actually can't remember how I came across it. I think someone may have mentioned it on Twitter, or it might have been one of those brief periods of time where I was trying really hard on social media to follow people of a variety of different political persuasions, something which I don't do anymore because it just makes me feel angry the entire time I use social media. But I came across it. I started talking about it, and I also tried to make contact with the relevant authorities to find out what was going on with this unauthorized dig, which was looking for human remains. Now, at some point halfway through last year, Susan Strongman came across the same blog. She got in contact with me. We had some conversation about the potential motivations and history of these particular beliefs. And then she got in contact very recently to say that she'd actually written a piece for RNZ that was going to be published at some point in the near future. And could I be interviewed for some sound bites, which then led to me being interviewed by Jesse Mulligan on the radio. So yes, I've been following the story for actually almost 3 years now.
Yep. So what are the details then? These guys, do they make their identities public on the blog? The impression I got was that they hadn't.
No, so whenever they do reference each other, and I'm actually not even sure whether all the blog posts are written by the same person or by individuals within the collective. There appears to be quite a number of non-archaeologists. I want to stress this here. These people who are engaging in tunneling into the earth have no archaeological training whatsoever. They always use initials to refer to each other, although Susan has been able to track down the identity of some of them, given other details that have come out, and at least one of the ringleaders has named himself publicly. I think his name is, I want to say Rodney Dangerfield, and yet suddenly I'm going,
doesn't sound right at all. No, that's another guy.
That sounds like a famous American comedian, but I actually think it might be this guy's name as well, because I think he's the Reiki practitioner. We'll get on to him in just a minute.
We'll get to Reiki eventually as well. Yes.
So they are of the belief that somewhere near Huntly there is a cavern containing within it the remains of several 7 to 8 foot tall human beings who predate the Maori, which was discovered by people and rumoured to exist about 20 years ago. And then the tunnel leading into this cavern was filled in to prevent anyone else from finding it. So they found what they thought was the covered-in entryway to the tunnel and have been excavating this tunnel now for over 2.5 years and have basically tunneled for about 14 meters underground to try to get to the burial place of these pre-Maori giants. And this dig is occurring on private land, so the actual tunnel entrance is apparently on a roadside, but the tunnel goes into nearby farmland. And on the blog, they intimated quite strongly that the owner of the land not only knew what they were doing, but strongly approved of what they were doing to prove that the real history of this place has been hidden away from the rest of us.
Yes, because here is the conspiracy angle. It's not just that here's an interesting thing we found that if true, could revolutionise a bunch of stuff, but it's the stuff that we're investigating has been deliberately hidden. What's the quote from the blog? Maori, as we know them, did not possess an empty land as taught in the school books these days or as printed these days in the media. Polynesians, greengrocer's apostrophe, in fact came to a land already occupied and then they conquered it. What is inside our cave when we finally reach the cavern part will eventually prove this. So yes, they are very, very deliberately seeking to upend history. There was a quote
very
somewhere else about it.
deliberately of the belief that the government and presumably Maori have been working together to hide that history from the rest of us.
Now, where did they get these ideas in the first place? I heard something in one of the articles about some road worker told them about it sometime, or some guy heard it from another guy or something. It seemed a little bit shaky.
So yes, there is a lot of the telephone game going on here. So the telephone game is the right title you should be using to the rather racistly named Chinese whispers.
That's only a New Zealand Australian thing, apparently. They
Really?
don't call it that overseas. Yeah.
Yeah, 'cause I mean, telephone game is a very American term.
Yeah. No, I've heard of Americans being horrified to hear that over here it gets called Chinese whisper.
Well, in the same respect, Americans are horrified that we have a sweet hair called Eskimos.
Well, yes, there's that as well. But that's another thing entirely.
It is. So yeah, there's been a story going around for a while, and it doesn't seem to be localized to any particular place. But people have heard of road workers who are doing work that digged up pre-Maori giant remains. They do have to ask how road workers know the remains they're digging up aren't Maori whatsoever. But the story goes they dig up these remains, they notify the Department of Conservation, and then the story is made to disappear, and thus people hear about it when they go down to the pub or they win a meat raffle or something of that particular kind. And there are a lot of these stories circulating. And all of these stories share in common that people in authority are trying to hide something from the rest of us. So there is a large-scale conspiracy operating at a departmental or governmental level to hide our true history. But these stories can never be made concrete. They are urban legends, essentially, in the same respect. You'll get the urban legend of a child playing in a sandpit that pricks itself on a sharp object, child falls sick, gets sent to hospital, and you discover that the child had a drug overdose because there was a heroin needle in the sandpit. And yet it turns out the needle in the sandpit is never from your town. It's from 2 towns down, but when you try to track that down, it's also from 2 towns down from there because there is no originating story.
Yeah, now the RNZ story includes a bunch more details about the background. Are these things Susan Strongman dug up in her own investigations, the various stories, or had she...
Some of them
from the blog?
No, so some of them are stories which have been going around for a long time. Some of them are from interviews with people in the locality, and some of them are from blog posts on Aotearoa.com.
So, yes, we have the story of Al Mannering, grew up on a nearby farm, recalls stories of a po whenua, a carved wooden post being found near where roadworks were being done, which he says, that shows that there is evidence of former Maori settlement or something like that, and claims he recalls seeing a human femur that was longer than his, and he's 6 feet tall.
I want to know how we can recognise that something is a human femur as opposed to a moa bone, or even just another bone in the human body. Is this man a serial killer who butchers victims and thus knows what a femur looks like? Is he a surgeon?
I don't know.
Is he a butcher?
To be fair, the femur is the longest bone, so...
Yes, but how do you know it's a human bone?
Well, exactly, yes. So we have now a story from 88-year-old Morris Tyson, who's lived in the area for a very long time, talks about a crypt filled with 14 or more 8-foot-tall skeletons, which were uncovered by road workers and then quickly reburied by archaeologists. Although he goes on to say he doesn't claim to have actually seen any of this or seen the being reburied or anything like that. He heard about it from the road workers.
Now, human bodies in caves is not an unusual phenomena in this country, because the disposal of bodies in certain iwi in Aotearoa, particularly pre-colonization by the Europeans, was putting bodies in caves. And it is also quite possible in a situation where a body has been left in a cave and the flesh and sinew has basically rotted away. The assemblage is going to look a lot larger because it's no longer being connected by ligaments. So stretched out or fallen apart, bodies will look a lot taller than they would be when they're kind of compressed into a muscular frame. So it's quite possible to see bodies in a cave and think they look taller than they actually are, because most of us don't ever encounter skeletons, and when we do see skeletons in TVs and movies...
Generally wired together.
Yes, precisely.
To give the proper proportions of a human body. Now, the one thing that sort of came up at the top of most of these stories is that these guys have been digging for a few years now, and claim to have found a bone. Which they claimed was they said it was a femur, did they? A human bone anyway, which they claimed was was a partial bone, but extrapolating out to its full size meant it was much larger than a bone of that kind should have been. People who have looked at least photos of this bone reckon it is a moa bone. The moa, for any of our non-New Zealand listeners might not know, New Zealand was home to a bunch of giant flightless birds.
And one giant, very
eagle.
flighty bird.
Yes, the
biggest eagle the world has ever seen.
8 sheep, apparently.
And there is some reason to think, because the Haast eagle actually died out somewhere about 1,000 years ago. But it's suspected, given certain Maori legends, that it must have been alive for a certain period of time after the initial wave of Polynesian colonization, because there are stories of children being snatched from their cribs by giant birds.
Yes.
And this bird is of the size that a baby would be the perfect snack for it.
It certainly would. But yes, apart from the Haast eagle, we had the moa, which the largest of them were like 9 feet tall, even more. Giant flightless birds, which naturally had very, very large leg bones.
And were preyed upon by kea.
Were they?
Yeah,
was it like those little fish that just bite chunks out of a whale and swim off?
Yes, but as parrots. So kea are these incredibly intelligent parrots that we have here that prior to European colonization used to move as giant flocks across the countryside. And they have a penchant for the liver of sheep. So basically farmers don't like kea because kea will grab onto the side of a sheep, locate its liver by smell, and using its really, really interesting beak, bite into the liver, eat the liver, which then leads to the sheep dying. Turns out a lot of moa remains we've found died because their livers have been eaten.
How about that?
And so it seems that the thing that made kea go, oh, sheep livers taste great, is a predisposition to eating livers generally, and their previous supply of livers, which died out a long time ago, has been replaced by sheep instead.
Well, how about that?
Very clever birds.
Anyway, enough of ancient fauna of our country.
Although we should...
It is.
I mean, if you want more about that, we can do a podcast special.
Yes, no, it is a fascinating subject. So what happened then? The story went up, you got interviewed, then there was an update of the story which said that, among other things, this claim that the farmer whose land they were digging under was supportive of them turned out to be not so much true
As hogwash.
completely untrue, yeah. And so the farmer apparently was livid to discover that these people had been digging around underneath his land. So suppose the dig has now been called off? Is that
Yes, although here's where the story gets interesting. So the last update on the blog about the dig, it was back in November. And in November, they were talking about how they'd got to a particular part of the tunnel. Now, I want to point out here, I don't think they're excavating a tunnel. I think it's very likely they're excavating the remains of a waterway which has filled up over time, which is why they're finding something which is a tunnel-like structure, but it's because water used to flow through it and it stopped and it's just kind of filled up with debris over time. As they've been digging through, they encountered an incredibly large boulder in the structure, which meant if they continued to dig forward, there was a very large likelihood of a collapse of a giant stone structure that if it struck someone would actually kill them, which to my mind kind of suggests it's not a tunnel at this particular point, it's something else entirely. So they're now going, oh, actually the dig was basically at an end before Susan wrote the story in question because this structure was going to be too hard for us to get around. Now there's nothing in the November update that indicates they're going to give up. I think they're trying to go the, no, we haven't been owned, you've been owned type of response there.
Right. So that's kind of where it stands. You got a few interesting contacts as a result of your raised profile.
Yes, so we're going to go through a Twitter conversation I had in just a minute, although end of last week I received a message from the University of Waikato, where I currently work, saying, this person has tried to get in contact with you, could you please ring them back? I assumed they were a student who wanted to know something about enrollment or assessment in a course I'm about to teach. It turned out it was a member of the public who wanted to tell me about how it was terrible that I was describing these conspiracy theories about a prehistory as conspiracy theories. To try to explain, I don't use the word in a pejorative sense, but he really wasn't listening to anything I said. And then proceeded to claim he wasn't a racist whilst engaging in a lot of racist speech.
Lovely.
And that was 20 minutes of my life I'm not getting back. But yes, on Twitter, we had I had an interesting exchange. And Josh, we're going to do a bit of role-playing here. I'm going to get you to play the person who is questioning the official narrative, and I'm going to play myself. Because I need to get the intonations right about the way that I was responding to these claims. So herein is...
Sure, so there's no possibility that I could be you and you could be the abusive asshole dick?
No.
Okay.
No. So the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy players are now going to produce a short play. Someone has an irritating conversation with M. The scene is a computer screen, two people typing to each other.
Well, sorry, before we start, what was the background to this? The first post, this guy references Susan. So was he replying to one of Susan Strongman's tweets about
So
her
yes,
article?
he was replying to her posting about the article online.
Righto. It begins. And this is a canoe prow, right, Susan? You're spelled Y-O-U-R, a complete sellout shill for a communist government. Please do shut your face hole. And there then follows a photograph of a carved piece of wood, which kind of looks like a canoe prow, but could be something else maybe. In the video version, we'll put it up on screen. Yeah.
And you think it's what exactly?
Well, what do you think it is?
You're the one disputing its provenance, so really you're the one who has to provide an alternative explanation. What do you think it is, and how does it relate to talk of 8-foot giants in our prehistory?
Okay, done. Why should I answer your questions?
I guess because you're accusing people of being in on a communist plot, because you're telling journalists not to report stories, which is why I'd like to know what you think that object is. But if you're not willing to support your assertion with argument, and here I miss out the word and evidence, so I just say argument, evidence, so be it.
Now at this point, M's interlocutor gets a bit sweary and kind of stays a bit sweary. So if you don't like strong language, maybe skip ahead a few minutes on the podcast. Because he continues, look at the fucking thing, you muppet. You really are a troll, huh? Are you a baby eater too? Obviously. If I came across you in a dark alley, I think I would drop to my knees and pray. It's the tuning end. Okay, now we get to the actual claim. It's the tuning end of a stringed instrument and much larger than normal. Satisfied, you freak?
So are all similar decorative prows of Polynesian vessels also the tuning end of a string instrument? Or is this the only one?
Which ones? Where I see nothing.
There are not only these things called museums which display similar objects, there are also books on Polynesian Polynesian boat building. Polynesian boat building is what I meant to say, and design. Modern examples. It's not as if people stopped building boats, etc.
Are you real? What are you talking about? You aren't making any sense, so therefore why should I listen to you? Prove that there is something they have compared it to. Prove to me that I am wrong. All I see is gibberish, which is normally spelled with a G, isn't it? Spells it with a J. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Here's a paper showing the wonderful variety of such prows. I provide a link. So there's one point of data for you. A cursory search online will find you quite a lot more such examples.
And oh look, none of them are as small as this one, and none of them even look the same. Must have been the outrigger prow then. What are you trying to do here? Best shut up and save face. Oh yeah, you obviously can't shut it by the looks of that face. I mean, in your photo, you do appear to be talking, which I guess the inference is that you never ever stop talking.
It's true, I don't.
I guess maybe that makes sense.
Do you think the prows of English ships at the time looked the same? The thing about decorative items is they all tend to look different.
Are you still here? I actually got distracted by the fact that he spelt a word wrong. The sentence suddenly made no sense to me, but what I think he was saying was, oh, now I've gone and lost the bloody part in the page because I touched the screen at the wrong time.
At least the tablet didn't crash.
The tablet didn't crash. I just accidentally bumped it and scrolled 3 screens down. Are you still here distracting me and wasting my time so I can't spread the word? Dork, get off. You are embarrassing yourself.
Shame you aren't interested in discussing evidence, but as you don't want to get to the nub of the issue, I won't bother you any further. Although, maybe you shouldn't have included me in your original tweet if you don't want to be challenged over your claims.
What's to talk about? Facts don't care about your feelings, mate.
I thought you didn't want to continue this conversation.
I will waste your time more than you will waste my time. I love talking to morons. Makes me hard. Charming. I bet you love that.
Tell me, who other than you thinks the object in question is part of a stringed instrument? Is there a body of work which attests to this? Who are the experts who opine that it is what you say it is?
Why are you so worried about what I have to say anyway? I have had an expert look at it and thinks it is definitely strange they call it a canoe prow. I am gifted, so don't need a so-called professional to make my decisions for me, and no, I won't tell you who, as that's my business.
You're the
Probably
one
comes from Canada.
You're the one accusing people of communist plots.
Then there's a link to the website kilts.co.nz. I assume it's not a website specifically about kilts?
No, it's a website about ancient Celtic New Zealand.
Funny that.
I am aware of that site. I'm also aware that its claims are not just disputed, but they're also not well supported by the oral histories and archaeology both here and abroad. Pray, what kind of sailing vessels were these purported Scots using to get here nearly 1,000 years ago?
Better ones than a bloody canoe or something made of reeds. Show me some evidence that disputes this.
Even the basic Wikipedia article on Polynesian navigation shows just how sophisticated their navigational technology was. Then there are the accounts made by Europeans at first contact with Polynesian peoples. Basic research, and I then provide a link to Polynesian boat technology.
But yet a people with better tech couldn't do it right? Dork, why are you even bothering? You are living the lie they tell you. Do not trust your government. And now things get explicitly conspiratorial. They have lied to you for centuries and continuing to blindly believe is what is wrong with this planet. The planet is all in capitals except for the T. He must have got his finger off the shift key too soon.
The Europeans did not have better aqua technology. People who study this point out that up until the European age of exploration, the Polynesians were better at traversing oceans. It's not plausible Europeans could have got here before the Maori with their technology at the time.
I asked for proof, not hearsay. Do shut you dickhole. So shut your... doesn't matter.
I don't know. I mean, it could be do shut, you
Yeah,
dickhole.
possibly.
Peer-reviewed research is more than just hearsay. More say than I think more so is what I meant to write there, than relying upon anonymous experts.
Where? I see nothing. Persians made it to South America and then here. Why are you wasting your time trying to convince someone that will never listen to you? Are you a bot? I suspect you are trying to get blocked. I don't block idiots. They deserve to hear the truth.
Where are the Persian city complexes in the Americas? Where are the inscriptions? Who translated them? These claims have all been carefully analysed in the past and found wanting. Also, you are the one who continued this conversation.
DNA evidence suggests otherwise, mate. Where is all your proof? All I see is rubbish drivel. Carry on, mate. I am here all day.
If the DNA evidence suggests this, where's the linguistic evidence? You would expect Persian words and phrases to have integrated into the language groups these Persians apparently interbred into. Where's that evidence? I suspect you're mistaking population genetics with evidence of pre-contact. Given global populations, we'll find evidence of people with ancestry from all over the place. The only reliable DNA you could furnish here is pre-contact bodies with Persian DNA. Where are those studies?
Blah, blah, blah. Where is your studies? You obviously don't look in the places that really matter. Stop reading and replying to me and go do some homework.
You just seem to be repeating claims made by Max Hill and Gary Cook. I'm afraid I tend to rely on experts and their work rather than that of amateur historians. I've read their material, along with Dutre, Brailsford and the like. It's not very convincing.
Who are they?
They are the major names in this country who promote the claims you are making. Have you not even done your own homework to see who else believes the stuff you do?
And the record ends there. So that was the last...
There was a little bit more and then I got blocked.
Right, yeah. After saying he wasn't going to block you, and after saying he was quite happy to keep talking to you and wasting it. Anyway, I begin to suspect that this person was not a good faith interlocutor.
No. In fact, having discovered this person on Facebook, they are also of the belief that Freemasons not only control the world and are engaging in satanic, paedophilic sacrifices on a day-by-day basis in this country, but they also control the evening breeze.
Nice.
No, apparently not. The breezes actually set out to destroy this person's life by annoying them at evening time.
Huh.
Yeah.
Oh, can't fault their logic.
Yes, you can.
Oh, well, I mean, I could. I just can't be bothered because...
Fair enough.
This sort of gets us... Let's finish things off with the talk of motive, basically, because there is nothing inherently wrong with believing that giant races existed or looking for evidence to prove this theory, just by itself like that. But in practice, when people go looking for evidence of other races, giant or otherwise, especially in this neck of the woods, it's usually to further some sort of a political agenda.
Indeed. And that agenda tends to be both the claim that Maori civilization can't have been as complex as people make it out to be, because they're brown savages, and also, if we can show that white people got to this country first, then the Treaty of Waitangi is null and void because reasons.
Yes, I mean, it's sort of another extension of the whole Moriori thing. That used to be the stock claim that, like, you know, European colonisers came and stole all the Maori's land. Well, the Maori only stole their land off the Moriori, so turnabout's fair play, nothing to complain about.
I should point out for non-New Zealand listeners, the Moriori are, and I have to be very careful here about talking about the Moriori because they have their own particular mythology and whakapapa, but they are a group of people who were living in Aotearoa, New Zealand, contemporaneously with the Maori. Most mainland New Zealand scholars believe that the Moriori are simply just another iwi of the Maori, whose culture developed in isolation on Rikohu, or the Chatham Islands. They certainly aren't, as was taught in schools in the early part of the 20th century, a pre-Maori Melanesian people who were chased out of these lands by the Maori when they arrived. And yet somehow, despite the fact that this bad history, which made it into the European history books but not the oral traditions of the Maori, continues to resonate to this day, despite the fact that the Moriori are going, no, we are not these pre-Melanesian people that you claim we are.
Also, P.S. we're not extinct, which is
Well,
one
yeah,
of
that's,
the other
yeah, that's,
claims,
that's the
yes.
other thing. They're able to go, we're not, because they still exist.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, so that was sort of historical education does appear to be furthering, and there was just recently there was an official governmental recognition.
Yes, in fact, I think it was actually last week.
It was just really recently, yeah. So it's becoming harder to lean on that one, but that's okay. You can go back to all the other ancient civilizations that supposedly were here before the Maori and who therefore were the real original inhabitants of this country and so on and so forth.
The Treaty of Waitangi thing here is interesting because we have a treaty between the Crown and Maori, which was basically a power-sharing arrangement made when the Europeans started coming here in number, and Maori became concerned about what was going on here, and the Crown was going, we need to kind of solidify our power base here. Now, the treaty itself is quite contentious because there's an English translation and there's a Te Reo Maori version of the text. They differ in some quite significant ways around key terms, and there's a lot of debate as to how we should interpret those differences. But what's important about this, the treaty is not a treaty between the indigenous people of this place and the Crown. It is a treaty between Maori as a people and Pākehā as a people, which means that even if it did turn out there was a civilization here before the Maori arrived, it wouldn't actually make the treaty null and void, because it's not a treaty between the first people and the Crown. It's a treaty between one people and another people, and nothing rests upon the claim of who was here first.
So there you go. So one last detail that we teased at the beginning of this episode, Reiki. One of these tunnel diggers is apparently a Reiki practitioner and has placed a curse on it just to keep it safe, which is interesting that obviously they don't place any stock in Maori notions of tapu, which would certainly apply if this was the resting place of other people, but they are fully on board with Reiki.
Now, I did refer to this Reiki practitioner as Rodney Dangerfield. That was incorrect. He is Rodney Davidson. But it's close enough to Dangerfield that I feel that I could have got away with that in a court of law.
So there you have it, basically. People were looking for giant bones, found what was probably a moa bone. They've stopped digging now anyway. Em talked about it on the radio.
Indeed. Just another day in the life of me as a conspiracy theory theorist.
Fascinating stuff. So, I think we're at the end of an episode. Once again, hope you enjoy the swanky new graphics.
They're swanktastic.
At the very least, they should show up as the icon on your podcast reader. But if you happen to look at the video episode, it'll also show up, I guess, for about 15 seconds on the start of it. But it looks very good, and we're very proud of it. It's on all our websites and stuff for the podcast.
And there may well be merchant.
And it's very cool. Yes, no, we have to get our hands on some merch.
Mugs, phone cases, maps.
Tea towels seem to be a thing these days.
Oh, actually, there's nothing quite like cleaning your aubergine with a tea towel with the podcaster's guide to the conspiracy on it.
So we'll have to investigate that. But until then, we will leave you alone, but not you, the patrons who've paid for this graphical rebrand, because we have a patron bonus episode coming up where we talk about local stuff, election stuff.
We've got donation scandals in this country. We've got a claim by George Soros about a conspiracy, not a claim about George Soros about a conspiracy. And we've got two bits of very interesting Trump-related news, one involving Julian Assange and the other one involving any of the show, Roger Stone.
Still got the Richard Nixon tattoo?
I think once you've got that tattoo, it's indelibly marked into your soul, so yes.
Okie doke. Well, so if you're interested in that, stick around if you're a patron. If you're not a patron, why not become a patron? Patron. I'm just going to keep saying the word patron until every one of you is a patron.
Actually, let's just chant patron and we'll just fade out on patron.
If you think that would work.
Patron. been listening to the Podcaster's Guide to the Conspiracy, starring Josh Addison and Dr. M.R.X. Denton, which is written, researched, recorded and produced by Josh and M. You can support the podcast by becoming a patron via its Podbean or Patreon campaigns. And if you need to get in contact with either Josh or M, you can email them at podcastconspiracy@gmail.com or check their Twitter accounts, Monkey Fluids and Conspiracism. And remember, they're coming to get you, Barbara.